chazak.org/live every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time for this amazing series, Echot Shabbat, Refresh of Rabbi Shai Tahan. Without further ado, Rabbi Shai Tahan Shlita.
Thanks again. Oh, very good. Very good. So thanks, Rabbi, for being always behind us and doing so much for Klal Yisrael. We like to continue what we have started in Hot Bishul, get straight to the point, halachot, lemaaseh, without a lot of pilpulim, without a lot of in and outs, just what is allowed and what is not. We spoke about the basics of Bishul. We spoke about the different kelim, which means we spoke about Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, and Kli Shlishi. Kli Rishon, we said that is mevashel, vadai mevashel. Kli Rishon means the pot that you have on a fire, or even if you took it off the fire, that's called the Kli Rishon. It's the first utensil which the water or the food boiled in it or heated up in it. Then you have what we call Kli Sheni. You remove from the first pot and put it into a second pot. That is called Kli Sheni. Kli Sheni is not mevashel normally, unless it's things that are kalei habishul, they're easily cooked. There are things that we consider easily cooked and quickly cooked, and therefore Kli Sheni could do that as well. According to Ashkenazim, they worry about everything. Maybe it is kalei habishul, or they also worry about the fact that it looks like you're cooking. So unless those are things that we know for sure they're not easily cooked, what the Gemara says, like for instance, water, that is not something that's easily cooked. So the Gemara permits that in Kli Sheni. Other things they would be worried about. But Sfaradim don't have that restriction unless with Kalei Bishul, then you have a machloket among Sfaradim. Things that are easily cooked, you have a machloket, you have dispute. According to some, it would be permitted. Even things that are Kalei Bishul, and according to many, it's not permitted. Lemaaseh, Chacham Ovadia and Or LeZion and many others say that one should take the more strict approach. And if it's something that it's Kalei Bishul, don't put it in Kli Sheni, rather put it in Kli Shlishi. Although there are those that restrict Kli Shlishi as well when we know something is Kalei Bishul. But we can be lenient. So again, to summarize that, Kli Rishon, the first utensil that was on the fire, definitely cooks, even if you took it off the fire. So that's therefore, if you want to put something in it, let's say you have water that heated up in it, and you want to put something in it, it's not permitted because the heat level in Kli Rishon, the first utensil, would come to cook that item. That was the first thing we learned. Secondly, we said that it needs to be a heat level of Yad Soledet. Yad Soledet, it's hot enough that you can't leave your finger. If you put your finger in it, you'll have to remove it after a few seconds due to the extreme heat and discomfort you feel in your finger, which is about 113 Fahrenheit. That is what we mentioned as well. So you have over here two things. It needs to be Yad Soledet, and it needs to be Kli Rishon. And the item that is being cooked, it's something that was not cooked completely yet. If it's something that was completely cooked, and bishul achar bishul, you don't have a prohibition to cook something that was already fully cooked beforehand, unless it wasn't fully cooked. It's 99% cooked, and even more so if it's not cooked at all or anything in between, and you want to heat it more, then you're violating cooking on Shabbat, because that extra 1% that it's still not cooked will go ahead and be cooked. Coming to that point, I like to mention today a new halacha, and that is what when we talk about hagasa. Hagasa means that you take your ladle and you are turning around and mixing the things in your pot. Let's say you have over here soup. So, and the soup is right now on the fire, on the blech. On Shabbat, you're not allowed to take that ladle or anything else. You're not allowed to take a spoon and mix while it's on the fire or on the blech. Why not? Because that brings the food or the soup in our case closer to the point of cooking. You are expediting the cooking of that soup, and that is not permitted. It's a Torah prohibition. What about food from the fire while it's on the fire again? If the food is not completely cooked, even if it's 99% cooked, but not 100% cooked, once you remove a little bit of the food from the pot, that pot that's left, that food that's left in a pot will get cooked much quicker. And that is also the prohibition of cooking. It's called memaher bishulo. That's not permitted. What about if it's fully cooked? The food is fully cooked. You have chulent on the fire, on the crack. It's fully cooked already. In the morning, 100% cooked. So, are you allowed to mix? The poskim say, Sfaradim and Ashkenazim, that one should not mix, even though it's fully cooked. But to remove from the chulent, Ashkenazim restrict doing that if it's still on the blech, on the hot plate, or even more so if it's on the fire. Sfaradim permit. Sfaradim permit taking food from the fire while it's fully cooked, while Ashkenazim would say that it's not permitted. Again, mixing would not be permitted, even according to Sfaradim, if it's on the fire, even if it's fully cooked. If one would ask, if it's fully cooked, what's the problem? Biur halacha. The Shara Tziyun in Mishnah Berurah, at the end of Siman Shin Yudchet, as a very strong, something that's fully cooked, you're allowed to recook. You're allowed to take it. You have children that's for fully cooked. It's dry food. It's not liquid. In liquid, we say, yes, bishul achar bishul. You can recook. There's a prohibition to recook something that's liquidy. But something that's solid, you can put back on the fire and cook it, or fire that needs to be covered. We'll learn soon the halachot of Chazara. But you're allowed to cook such a thing again. And bishul achar bishul, it's not considered cooking since it was fully cooked already beforehand. So what should be the problem with that? Says the Shara Tziyun, if that's the case, why is it that mixing or removing food while it's on the fire should be prohibited? It's a kolbo that the Bet Yosef brings down that it's asur. It's a big question. Some want to say, that's how Rav Shlomo Zalman wants to say, and others as well, that we're afraid that if you take food, that even though it's fully cooked in such a fashion, you remove the food with a ladle while it's on the fire, or you mix the food on the fire, or you take, as we explained before, you do any of those things, then maybe you'll forget next time where you're going to come and take the food while it's not fully cooked. It's something that people make mistakes many times, that you get used to doing something and it becomes a habit, and then you a little bit, as we say, cut corners. And you say, okay, what's the difference? This way, that way. You don't realize that the halakha over here is very precise, that this is the way it should be done and not any other way. So therefore, something like that, we are afraid that you're going to do it. Tiferet Israel says this answer, and Rav Shlomo Zalman says another answer. And he says that we're afraid that people are going to see you taking food in such a fashion, what? It's still on the fire, and they won't know when they see you that the food is fully cooked, and they think that's permitted, and they'll do it in their house when it's not fully cooked. Another answer that they want to say that we're still afraid that maybe not everything was 100% cooked over here. We have a chashash that maybe, although it's 100% cooked, but maybe there's a crumb, maybe there's something there that's not fully cooked, that over here we are worried about that very little thing. So again, those are the reasoning of the halakha I just mentioned, but let's summarize again. The halakha according to Sfaradim and Ashkenazim. Ashkenazim are strict, the machmir. They take the strict approach not to mix food that's on the fire, that's on the hot plate, that's in the crack pot, while it's still on the heating device. They won't mix it, even if it's fully cooked. If it's not fully cooked, I understand. While you're mixing hagasa, what happens is you're expediting the cooking, and that's called memer bishulo. That's not permitted. That's called that you're cooking right now on Shabbat. But what should be the problem with such a thing if it's fully cooked? So we mentioned different reasoning, but there are also restrictions if it's fully cooked. Same thing would be removing food from the fire. According to Ashkenazim, you're not allowed to remove the food while it's on the fire. You want to eat. You want to take a little bit from the cholent, and you don't want to take the whole pot and take from the cholent. Rather, you want to keep it there and open the ladle, open the cover, and take with the ladle a little bit food into your plate. That's not permitted according to Ashkenazim, even if the food or the cholent or whatever it is fully cooked. Sfaradim, on that very point, would permit. Everything else not. Mixing the food while it's on the fire is not allowed. For sure not if it's not fully cooked. But even if it's fully cooked while it's on the fire, one should stir. But when we're not talking about stirring, rather just removing food from the fire, then if the food is not fully cooked, of course, Faradim would also restrict, because by doing that, you are expediting the cooking. Whatever's left would be less with the same amount of heat. Less food would get cooked quicker. Less food in a pot gets cooked quicker than more food in a pot. But if it's fully cooked, to remove the food in such a fashion, you don't have in mind to expedite anything, and it's fully cooked, then Sfaradim permit doing such a thing. Now, when we're talking about having food on the fire, remember that we have dinim that we didn't speak about yet. It's called Sheya, Chazara, and Hatmana, which are very important halachot. Let's talk about Chazara today. Chazara means returning food to the fire. You're not allowed to return food once you took it off the fire and put it back on, unless there are certain conditions. The Shulchan Aruch brings all those conditions in Siman Resh Nun Gimel Seif Bet. The halacha over there says if you have a problem, you can remove the pot and put it on your table and take food from there without any hesitation. That's not an issue and that's not a problem. But what happens if you want to take that food, let's say you took chamin, cholent, you want to put it back now on the crack pot, you want to put it back on the hot plate, you want to put it back on the fire. Over here, you have to know when it's permitted and when not. The very basic, obvious first condition is that the food needs to be completely and fully cooked. If it's not fully cooked, once you took it off the fire and it's not fully cooked, so putting it back on the fire would complete the cooking, and that's a violation of Shabbat. Not only removing it from the fire will be a violation of Shabbat, but also opening the pot cover and then covering it back fully cooked. You are expediting right now. We took off the cover so the heat escapes, comes out, the steam, the heat. Once you put the cover on, it preserves the heat, it preserves the steam, it keeps the heat inside the pot, and then it would get cooked much quicker. Such a thing is not permitted on Shabbat unless it's fully cooked. So one needs to know that if there's a doubt whether your chamin, let's say you want to take chamin at night, you don't know, is it fully cooked? It's not fully cooked. If you open that cover, you're not allowed to close it anymore. Closing it would be a violation of Shabbat. In the morning, then for sure the chamin was cooked throughout the night and it's fully cooked. And if you want to take food from the chamin and put it back on with the conditions that we speak, then it would be permitted. Even at night, if you think it's fully cooked, there are those that are machmir. If you have bones, say you have pieces of chicken with bones. So Or Etzion was machmir with such things. He didn't like that one should remove the pot cover and put it back on at night. That would be not allowed. Why? Because the bones get also, for them, it takes much longer to get cooked. And when you're closing the pot, you are expediting the cooking of the bones. The problem, those that would permit would say that bones is not something that people normally eat. So it's only if you are a person that likes to eat those bones, or there's different ways of how to consume. Some people suck into them and so on. That is one problem. But when we're dealing with the laws of Chazara, returning food to the fire, one needs to know the basic is that obviously the food needs to be completely cooked. Now, secondly, when we remove the food from the fire and you want to put it back on, second condition that everybody agrees must be there is that the fire must be covered. You're not allowed to put the food back on the fire without the fire being covered. It's called in halakha gufa vektuma. Either you remove the ashes from the oven or wherever the food was at the time of Chazal, that there were ashes there. Like let's say the kiraim, you have stovetops, the way it was done it with coals, and that would create the fire. So you have to either remove those coals, or on the other hand, you have another thing you could do, and that is to cover the coals. Why is that? Because when a person would come to Isur, would be, when you do that, you want to put it straight on the fire, it would be chashash. Maybe you're going to come to play with the ashes, and therefore, Shema Yechate, it's called in the Gemara, you might come to play around with the ashes, and that is a isur of mav'ir, putting on fire, something that one needs to keep in mind. So therefore, Chachamim restricted that one should not in any way do the following thing: put it back on while the fire is exposed, it's not covered. Therefore,